Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the second week of the Rugby Research and Injury Prevention Group 2025 Analytics Series. Our first intern will be myself. My name is Asha Gadraj, and I'm from Columbia University. I will be presenting on different types of studies in medical research. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Asha Gadraj, and I will be going over study types in medical research. And so, as a basic introduction, similar to how a diagnosis could open multiple pathways for treatments, a specific research aim could warrant to different types of research options. And as this diagram, I think, very concisely explains, there are different types of research. So, it's broken down into primary research and secondary research. So, primary research can also be broken down into three additional categories. The first one being basic research. This is research that you would see cell cultures, animal studies, among other preliminary drug studies that are used with cells and often mice. However, we will be focusing today on clinical studies and epidemiological studies as they prioritize human patients as their basic aim. There's also secondary research, which we encounter often in our literature searches. This is analyzing pre-existing studies, and these include meta-analyses and literature reviews. And so the first thing I'm going to go into is clinical studies. So the patients are often the foreground, and there are two types of clinical studies, which are interventional and observational studies. Interventional studies, as the name suggests, they intervene directly within patient care. For example, whether a patient is experiencing a new drug or a new surgical procedure. I'm going to use the example of a drug trial to explain how a clinical trial works. So they often are broken up into four phases, especially for vaccines or other medicines. Phase one often focuses on safety and the proper dose of the medication. This is often used on a very small number of patients, as you can see, 15 to 50 patients. These are often used, for example, in cancer treatments with patients that have a poor prognosis or otherwise are a small study in general. Phase two is a slightly larger study, but once again, not that large, and this focuses more on the effectiveness and side effects of the certain medication. Phase three compares the new treatment to an existing treatment, which can take place with hundreds of people. And then finally, phase four is approved, but this is more focused on long-term effects of the certain medication. The next type of clinical study is an observational study, and this is basically drawing connections based on current observations. So, a prognostic study is a factor that takes place in variables such as age, medical history, and weight. And prognostic studies are often prospective in nature and they analyze how variables impact the research question. For example, if your research question pertains to how do people that smoke, what is the effect of their chances of getting lung cancer, a prognostic study will analyze age and they would try to see if the age of the given population will affect how likely it is for someone to get lung cancer. A diagnostic test study is essentially an investigative procedure versus an established method. So, as we were talking about yesterday, if you recall, how ankle braces and kinesio taping both help an athlete in terms of stability. A diagnostic test study would investigate both methods and try to concur as to which one was more effective. And finally, a case series is when a select population with no control is observed. So, for example, if you have a very small population with lung cancer, a case series may be established to try to correlate how the lung cancer or different variables impact their day-to-day function. Next, we have epidemiological studies. And essentially, these studies analyze frequency, distribution, changes in time, and causes. As you can see from this graphic, they can be broken down into two observational studies, which I will analyze on the next slide, and experimental studies. So, experimental studies, as I will focus on this slide, for example, three types. One could be randomized controlled trials, which use patients as units of study, but this is mostly for assessing, for example, a new type of therapy. Small portions of studies could either be field trials or group trials. So, a field trial is essentially raw data collected from people in the same region, while community trials analyze different communities to try to assess relationships between how certain factors impact a population holistically. So, an example that I was given really was, for example, the incorporation of iodine in table salt. So, a field trial will analyze the impact of that in a small region, while a group trial would analyze different communities across the globe. And we will be moving into observational epidemiological studies, which is the bulk of the studies you will encounter. And there are three types of those. The first is a cohort study. This is essentially comparing a group of individuals to an unexposed group of individuals to determine if the outcome is associated with exposure. So there are retrospective and prospective types. Retrospective essentially looks back in time, analyzes the outcome, and tries to see, looking back in time, what factors or what variables contribute to that. While